Hi there, Paul Newsome here from Swim Smooth. Today we're going to look at how some of the new features of the Swim Smooth Guru are really going to help to maximise your training time in the water. Let's start off by looking at some of the links between those new features. You're probably familiar with CSS pace, critical swim speed. To work out this number, you need to do a 400 metre and then a 200 metre time trial, and the Guru, by inputting that information, the Guru will look at the rate of drop off between the two. This pace is equivalent to the pace that you should be able to maintain for a continuous 1500 metre swim. The benefit of breaking it down as a 400 and 200, besides the fact that psychologically it's quite easy to do that, is that we're able to look at how aerobic you are compared to how anaerobic you are. To swim well over 400 metres and above, you need to really develop your aerobic efficiency. Many times people spend too much time training at very, very short, fast intervals with lots of rest and recovery. And sure, it's nice to hit those fast times, but is it really doing anything to help maximise your distance swimming over 400 metres and above? Arguably not. So the first part of this process is to work out what your CSS pace is. Do the 400, do the 200, input that information into the Guru. Once the Guru has that information, we can then start to look at what this connection between STSS score. So, yet another abbreviation. STSS stands for Swimming Training Stress Score. So this is an arbitrary number given to every session that you might do within the app or sessions that you might manually add yourself, whereby we know what your threshold pace is, and anything that we look at how long you swam at relative to that pace for, we can work out a score. So let's say, for example, you were to swim 1 hour continuously at CSS pace. First and foremost, we probably need to get a stretcher down onto the pool deck to take you away. That's going to be pretty challenging swimming. But when you're very fit, it is possible to do that or get very close to it. But anyway, let's say that that gives you 100 STSS score points. Now, any other session that we do relative to that, we can give a score of how much fatigue that particular session is going to create for you. So an easy technique session where you're doing lots of drills with plenty of rest and recovery, thinking about your form, might give you an STSS score of around about 35 or 40. A really hard red mist endurance session where you're swimming for longer than an hour typically, maybe even up to an hour and a half if you're doing 5 kilometers of it, might give you an STSS score of around about 120 points. So thereby, that red mist session, if you've ever done one, you'll know just how much more demanding it is than a technique session. Now, this concept came about from the guys from Training Peaks, and we love it. It's such a simple process. I spent some time with them in 2006 learning about this and thinking, how could we actually better incorporate this for you guys with your swim training? STSS, or rather TSS, Training Stress Score, has been around for quite a long time, especially for cycling and running. And if you're already using Training Peaks, you might be well aware of how this information can help you improve your performance. But let's show you now how we can integrate this into your swim training and help you improve that. Now, assuming you have your CSS pace dialed in correctly, as mentioned, we can calculate an STSS score for every session that you do. But one of the great new features of the Guru is this CSS tweaking thing. After every key session you do, so let's say it's a CSS development session or a red mist endurance session, with those targeted times, if you get through that session and felt absolutely amazing, you hit all of your times, you might go into the CSS tweaker and hit the heroic button. That's going to boost your performance for next time and give you target times which are just a little bit faster. Now, incrementally over a series of weeks and months, that's how you can get yourself off this plateau. CSS tweaking is a really simple concept. It allows you to be proactive with your training rather than simply reactive, or maybe let's say doing 6 weeks, a 6-week training block, and then finding out after 6 weeks that, yeah, you improved a little bit, but maybe not as much as you want. With CSS tweaking, we can keep that going forwards over time and progress nicely. And the good thing about doing that is if you do tweak your CSS, then your STSS score for each session becomes more accurate over time as well. Now, with these two things in combination, CSS and the STSS score, we can start to work out how your fitness tracks over time. Let me introduce you to a very, very simple concept, and you're probably aware of this just training for swimming as it is. Obviously, When you do a training session, the purpose of doing that training session, above and beyond obviously working on your form and your technique, is to develop fitness. Fitness develops over time. The more progressive and more consistent you can be with your training, the better that improvement is going to be over time. But of course, the more you train, the more fatigued you get. Now, fitness takes a longer term approach to improve. Fitness obviously responds on a day-to-day basis. So if you did a very, very hard session, you might feel very tired the following day. You're not necessarily going to get the fitness gains of that particular session tomorrow, but over time it will start to ramp up. What we've got to try and do is we've got to try and balance out the amount of fitness you're trying to get from a particular session with the amount of fatigue it causes. And that balance is what we can term your form. So tracking this over time with the SwimSmooth Guru should give you an indication of how likely you are to perform well in a race. Equally, if you're going through a bit of a flat spot, you'll be able to identify, as I'm going to show you with this example in a moment, you'll be able to identify why that's occurring. So, let's have a look at some charts here. If we look at good progression, what we're looking for, you may be familiar with the term periodization. Typically, this involves a series of weeks or even a series of sessions where you progressively increase your intensity and your duration, and then after, let's say, 3 weeks of working quite hard, you might have an easy recovery week. And we all know that that easy recovery week is important in order to help you progress down the line. But the charts here, the fitness tracker, will show you just how important that is. Let me show you. So let's say we do a series of sessions in a row. They help to build up our fitness, but the line there is quite gradual. Equally, by doing those sessions, the amount of fatigue they cause increases at a much greater rate. Now, if we were to take an easier week, what happens during an easy week? It's important to do these easy weeks, but what happens is your fitness arguably starts to drop off just a little bit. But like it took a long time to build up, it also drops off at quite a slow rate as well, relatively, so long as you don't leave it for too long. But that rest and recovery period is important because we can get the fatigue line to drop down quite sharply as well. So over time, good progression looks like this, balancing out the fatigue. We get to these points here where you actually reach really good form, and usually that occurs somewhere around about here, where we have a good level of fitness, but we've allowed ourselves a couple of days where the fatigue line has actually started to drop down. That's what it should look like. And the Guru is programmed to help you achieve that. Like I mentioned before, every training session you do has this STSS score. So as you complete each session, and you maybe edit and write a few notes in there, this will all happen in the background for you. It might start off as looking like a bit of a weird chart that you don't understand, but over time, you'll see these lines start to increase, unless you get it wrong, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. Now, the numbers that are produced from this are fairly arbitrary. What you should be looking for, though, is whether or not these lines, the blue lines, increase too sharply. Because if you add too much training volume in too short a period of time, what will happen is the amount of fatigue will increase exponentially as well. So it's all very well trying to increase at a sharp rate, which you might do, let's say, at a training camp. But if we allow that to go on for too long, ultimately what tends to happen is, because the fatigue rate kicks up so quickly, that will continue on, and we run the risk of overtraining. When that happens, either you'll get sick or you might get injured. Either way, you'll need to spend some time off training, which is not great. The fitness line obviously then starts to drop down. So this sawtooth graph starts to become more deep in the troughs and higher in the hills, as it were. And unfortunately, over time, you won't make the sort of progress that you want. Now, on the other scenario for poor progression is somebody who doesn't do enough training. So you might be ticking along where every session is the same as the last. Or maybe, worse still, fitness starts to drop off because you're simply not getting down to the pool regularly enough. Swimming anywhere between 2 and 4 times per week can be really beneficial for your swimming, but it's much more beneficial to swimming every 3 times per week consistently over the course of the year than it is to maybe go gung-ho for 4 or 5 weeks and then do nothing for 2 or 3 weeks, either because you get bored, potentially, or you get sick, or you get injured. Now, of course, the fatigue line is nowhere near as high on that. So if you are somebody who just purely can't get down to the pool as much as you'd like to, the whole idea of periodization is quite interesting. We sort of buy into this idea that we need to have these bouts of training and then a recovery week, but if you're only swimming once or twice per week, you probably don't actually need that recovery week, and my encouragement would be to actually consistently just swim those 2 or 3 sessions per week, do it consistently and without worrying too much about those recovery sessions, simply because you're not building up enough fatigue to warrant them. I know it sounds harsh, but it's reality. So those are 3 scenarios. We don't want to be overcooking it. If you did a hard training camp, that might boost fatigue, of course, and really help you with your fitness. But even then, we need to be careful about how long that progresses for. Equally, our rate of progress doesn't want it to be so slow, or our consistency doesn't want to be so far off the mark that we simply never make any progress with your fitness at all. What we're looking for is something like this. And being able to track this now with our new fitness tracker is a very simple way of doing it. Now we're going to finish off here with an email that came through from an athlete who's using the Guru, who was looking at this, and he contacted me and said, yeah, I've been going really quite well, but all of a sudden I feel like I've hit a bit of a bad spot. We're going to look at which one of those scenarios he's inevitably instigated within his training that has unfortunately caused him to have this poor form. I contacted him back and told him exactly what to do, and ironically enough, he'd already instinctively thought that that was the course of action that he needed to take. So having access to this information, and it is literally a case of just ensuring that you have a good CSS time programmed in at the start, that you tweak your CSS regularly as you improve, or have a bad patch and need to drop it back a little bit, and then equally, knowing that we've got this accurate STSS score for every session you do, we can then really maximize our use of the fitness tracker and ensure that we're doing the right type of training over the right period to really elicit some good improvements. And let's face it, you guys deserve that. You're down there, you're training consistently, you're trying to do the right thing by using the SwimSmooth Guru. Let's try and help you really improve that. Okay, here's the example. Okay, so let's take a look at Simon's chart that he sent through. He wanted me to be able to tell him, what do these numbers mean, fitness and fatigue, and more importantly, what does the chart show him? Now, I've already gone through and marked on some key areas for us to look at. The chart shows us here, as yours will do as well, his fitness gains over time, and also the amount of fatigue, this orangey yellow line, that he's experiencing. The harder the session, so the higher the STSS, so training stress score that a particular session is, the more fatigued you will become. So it's about managing and monitoring the balance between the amount of fitness, long-term fitness that you get from a session with the amount of fatigue that it creates. And that balance is where we get your form from. So if we look down at the bottom chart here, this is a measure of Simon's training stress score over time. Basically, each one of these yellow columns is a particular session that he's performed. We can see up until around about the end of the green circle here, all of these sessions have been averaging around about 55, 60 training stress score points. And if we look at the chart above, his fitness has been developing nicely. Now, Simon contacted me because he said he's going through a bit of a flat spot. He's feeling a bit tired. And what's actually happened here is he's taken a couple of days off, it looks like. And then he's had a very big session, probably a red mist session, close to 120. And then he's been followed by these sessions here, 3 or 4 of them in a row, averaging around about 85 or 90 training stress score points. So that's a heavy bout of training. Now, over a short period like this is not necessarily too bad. One of the concepts of improving your freestyle and improving your general endurance sport over time is this idea of overreaching. So you have to put in these bigger periods of hard training in order to actually become better and bring you off your plateau. Of course, what I was saying in the video before, though, is spend too long overreaching, and that then becomes potential for overtraining. which can elicit itself as injury or illness or simply staleness and burnout. If we look at the chart then above, we can see the response to this heavy training period has left Simon quite fatigued. His fatigue level has really increased. He contacted me because he said in his email that I thought, okay, well, maybe it's time to have an easy kilometre swim tomorrow. And that's precisely what he did. And that was exactly the right thing for him to do. So by dropping off some of that fatigue, his fitness will drop back a little bit, but nowhere near as steeply as the fatigue line drops off. By dropping off this fatigue line just for 2 or 3 days, Simon will then be ready to putting another stronger bout of training, and consequently, over time, he'll get this nice stepping effect, stepping progressively forwards. So avoid long periods of heavy training, but equally make sure you are training in order to allow this fitness line to build over time. By balancing out those two things, we should be well set for improving your fitness and improving your general swimming performance over time. I hope you really enjoy using the SwimSmooth Guru. This really is a new way to have insightful input into your own training and monitor progress over time.